Emotional manipulation rarely announces itself with a warning sign. It doesn't come crashing into your life like a thunderstorm. It sneaks in, gentle as a breeze, and slowly rewires your instincts. That's why recognizing the subtle red flags early on is your first line of defense. Because before you know it, you're second, guessing your own memory, questioning your worth, and wondering why you feel so drained after every interaction. It starts with charm. Manipulators are often incredibly charismatic at first. They listen intently, compliment generously, and seem to understand you in a way others don't. You might feel seen, even special, but that's part of the setup. What they're really doing is studying you, your vulnerabilities, your values, the cracks in your armor. They're collecting emotional data they'll use later to control and confuse you. And because you feel a deep emotional bond so quickly, your guard goes down, leaving you exposed to deeper forms of control. One of the first red flags is inconsistency between words and actions. A manipulator might promise you the world one day and go cold the next. They'll make grand statements like "I'll always be there for you," but disappear when you actually need them. This inconsistency isn't accidental. It's a way to destabilize you, keeping you emotionally off balance. You start chasing that first high, the loving version of them you met at the beginning, and ignore the emotional whiplash that follows. You tell yourself they're just going through something. You forgive them again and again. Another tactic to watch for is guilt tripping. Manipulators are experts at flipping the narrative. They'll say things like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me." Suddenly, you feel like the villain for setting a boundary or expressing a need. You begin to question your own intentions and actions. And here's the trap. The more you try to prove you're not a bad person, the more control you hand over to them. You enter a cycle of explaining, defending, and apologizing, while they do none of the same. Gaslighting is perhaps one of the most toxic red flags. You'll notice it when they deny things you know happened. They'll say, "You're too sensitive," or "That's not what I said," even when you clearly remember the moment. Over time, you stop trusting your own memory and start relying on them to tell you what's real. That is not love. That is not communication. That is mental warfare dressed as intimacy. And then there's love bombing. Intense affection and attention come fast and heavy, but only to create dependence. They may say, "You're the only one who truly gets me," or "I've never felt this way before." It feels intoxicating, but it's designed to blur your judgment. It creates a false sense of urgency, where you invest deeply before you even really know the person. And once you're in, they begin to shift. The affection fades, replaced by criticism, mood swings, and control, leaving you addicted to the version of them that probably never existed. What makes these red flags hard to see is that they don't come all at once. They unfold slowly, wrapped in mixed signals and emotional confusion. But when your gut says something is off, listen. Manipulation thrives in the space where you ignore your instincts in favor of someone else's version of truth. The most dangerous mental trap in all of this is believing someone's words over their patterns. Words can be beautiful lies, patterns are the truth. When someone repeatedly shows you that their presence in your life causes more anxiety than peace, that's your signal. That's your proof. Don't wait for louder pain. Don't wait for permission. You are allowed to walk away from anything that makes your soul feel heavy. Because manipulation isn't just what they do. It's what you start doing to yourself when you ignore the truth. There's a quiet kind of power in knowing where you end and someone else begins. That's what emotional boundaries give you. Not walls, not distance, not coldness, just clarity. And when you're dealing with manipulation, that clarity becomes everything. It's your shield. Without strong boundaries, you become a mirror for everyone else's needs, while your own slowly fade into the background. A lot of people misunderstand boundaries. They think it's about pushing others away or being harsh. But real boundaries aren't about rejection, they're about protection. They're the invisible lines you draw to honor your emotional safety, your time, your energy, and your values. When someone respects your boundaries, they respect you. When they don't, they're showing you they were only ever interested in control, not connection. Manipulators hate boundaries. Why? Because boundaries give you the power. They strip the manipulator of their favorite tools: guilt, obligation, and confusion. That's why when you start setting boundaries, you'll likely face resistance. You might hear things like, "You've changed," or "Why are you being so distant?" They'll try to make you feel guilty for doing what's healthy, and that's the moment you need to stay rooted. Because it's not your job to make others comfortable at the expense of your own peace. Boundaries start with self-awareness. You have to get honest about what drains you, what hurts you, and what feels wrong, even if you can't explain it yet. If a conversation always leaves you feeling small, if someone's presence creates anxiety rather than calm, that's worth paying attention to. Your emotional energy is your currency. Spend it wisely. You don't owe it to people just because they want access to it. But here's where it gets tricky. The manipulative mind will try to convince you that setting a boundary makes you a bad person. That saying no means you're selfish. That putting yourself first is a betrayal of love or loyalty. That's a mental trap, and it's powerful. Especially if you were raised to believe love always means sacrifice, or that being a good person means always being available. You don't have to explain your boundaries. You don't have to justify your needs. You don't even have to argue when someone crosses the line. Silence can be your strongest boundary. Distance can be your clearest response. You're not obligated to be available just because someone demands your time or energy. You're allowed to say, "This doesn't work for me," and walk away without guilt. And let's talk about the boundary with yourself, the one where you stop rescuing people who are perfectly capable of rescuing themselves. You have to learn to tolerate the discomfort of not fixing, not pleasing, not over-explaining. That's where your real strength begins. Because every time you abandon yourself to keep the peace, you're teaching your nervous system that your needs don't matter. And that silent lesson is what keeps people trapped in manipulation for years. One of the hardest things about boundaries is maintaining them consistently. Not just when you're angry, not just when you're hurt, but even when everything seems fine. Because manipulators often test your limits subtly, with charm or small requests, just to see how much space they can take. That's why consistency is key. A boundary is only as strong as your ability to uphold it when it's inconvenient. So ask yourself, what am I allowing that drains me? What am I tolerating that silences me? And who benefits when I stay quiet? Your answer will tell you everything, because at the end of the day, if your peace feels like it's always under negotiation, it's time to stop negotiating. To truly shield yourself from emotional manipulation, you have to understand how it works, not just what it looks like from the outside, but what it does to your mind from the inside. Manipulation doesn't always come with visible scars. It operates in the shadows of your insecurities, slipping into the spaces where you doubt yourself. And once it's there, it doesn't try to overpower you with force. It slowly makes you question your own thoughts, your feelings, your reality. The truth is, most emotional manipulation isn't random. It's calculated, it's strategic. It works because it preys on something inside you, your longing to be loved, your desire to be seen, your instinct to fix, to help, to please. Manipulators don't invent your vulnerabilities, they just exploit them. They sense your need for approval, and then they withhold it. They sense your fear of abandonment, and then they threaten it, silently, subtly, and repeatedly. One of the most important things you can do is learn how manipulators weaponize emotion. They use guilt like a tool. You speak up, they act hurt. You ask for space, they accuse you of being distant. You say no, and suddenly you're made to feel like you've done something wrong. It's not by accident. They want you to associate your needs with causing pain, and once that connection is made in your mind, they have control. Because now, every time you consider standing up for yourself, you second guess it, you pull back, you silence yourself. Another common tactic is triangulation, when manipulators involve a third person, either real or imagined, to make you feel insecure. Well, she never had a problem with this, or everyone says you're too sensitive. It's meant to isolate you, to make you feel like the outsider in your own life. It creates a false standard you can never meet, because it keeps shifting. And when you're constantly being compared or blamed, your self-worth starts to erode. You begin to think, maybe they're right, maybe I am the problem, and that's where gaslighting enters the picture. It's not just denial, it's psychological sabotage. You bring up an issue and they say, that never happened, or you're imagining things. You start to doubt your memory. You begin relying on their version of events instead of your own. Over time, your grip on reality loosens, and their voice becomes louder than your own intuition. That's the dangerous part, because when you lose trust in yourself, you become easier to control. But once you understand these tactics, not just intellectually, but emotionally, you start to see the game for what it is. You start recognizing when a conversation isn't about resolution, but about manipulation. You begin to catch those subtle shifts, how they avoid accountability, how they twist your words, how they use your past against you. And that's when you start reclaiming your power, because awareness is the beginning of freedom. When you know how the puppet strings are being pulled, you stop dancing. You stop apologizing for having emotions. You stop questioning your reality just because someone else doesn't want to face theirs. The biggest trap to avoid is internalizing the blame. Manipulators are masters at projection. They throw their pain onto you and then accuse you of being the cause. But you are not responsible for the emotional storms someone else refuses to deal with. You are not the villain in a story they're rewriting to protect their ego. You can't change how a manipulator plays the game, but you can refuse to play your part in it. When it comes to protecting yourself from emotional manipulation, one of the most powerful things you can do is build emotional resilience from the inside out. Because manipulation feeds on weakness, not physical or intellectual weakness, but emotional instability. The more reactive you are, the easier you are to control. The more you crave validation, the more they withhold it. The more you seek peace from outside yourself, the more chaos they create. That's why your greatest weapon isn't revenge or even resistance, it's emotional strength. Resilience isn't about being emotionless, it's about being emotionally self-aware. It's about noticing your triggers, feeling your feelings, and still being able to respond rather than react. Manipulators want you reactive. They thrive on emotional chaos. They push your buttons not because they're curious, but because they want to know exactly where the cracks are. And once they find them, they press harder. So if you've ever found yourself crying, yelling, explaining, begging, and then walking away feeling drained and confused, it wasn't an accident. It was a performance and they were directing it. To break free from this cycle, you have to become emotionally grounded. That means pausing before reacting. It means understanding that your first emotional impulse isn't always the truth. Sometimes it's just a trauma echo. When someone pushes you, your power lies in your ability to stay centered. Not because you're cold or uncaring, but because you're in control of you. Start by checking in with yourself regularly. Notice what situations drain your energy, who makes your chest feel tight, who leaves you walking on eggshells. Pay attention to your body. It always knows the truth before your mind catches up. Journaling can help here. Writing things out forces you to name your emotions, to organize the chaos. And once it's on paper, it loses some of its power. Another key to emotional resilience is learning not to take things personally. That's hard when you care deeply, but not everything someone says about you is actually about you. Manipulators often project their insecurities onto others. If they call you selfish, it's often because you've stopped catering to their needs. If they say you're too sensitive, it's because your feelings inconvenience their agenda. Once you understand that, you stop absorbing their words like gospel. Mindfulness helps too, not the fluffy kind that tells you to just let it go, but the kind that trains you to observe your thoughts and emotions without becoming them. You can feel angry without acting in anger. You can feel sad without needing someone else to fix it. That space between feeling and reacting, that's where freedom lives. And manipulators can't touch you there. There's also value in building a supportive inner circle. Not everyone deserves access to your raw self. Share with people who reflect your truth back to you, not those who distort it. When you're emotionally isolated, manipulation thrives. But when you're grounded in people who truly see you, it loses its grip. But maybe the most vital part of resilience is self-compassion. Because the more kindness you show to yourself, the less desperate you become for someone else's approval. And once you stop needing validation from the outside, manipulators lose their hook. They can't control someone who doesn't need what they're pretending to offer. The biggest trap to avoid here is letting fear, shame, or guilt hijack your decisions. When you act from those places, you abandon yourself. But when you act from clarity, groundedness, and self-respect, you protect your peace, not by force, but by presence. Because nothing disrupts manipulation more than a person who knows their worth and refuses to hand it over. One of the most important shifts you can make when protecting yourself from emotional manipulation is learning to stop over-explaining. It might sound simple, but it's a game changer. See, manipulators thrive on your need to be understood. They bait you with accusations, misunderstandings, and passive-aggressive comments, not because they're genuinely confused, but because they want to keep you explaining. And the more you explain, the more they twist. The more you try to clarify, the more they distort. It's not a conversation, it's a trap. There's a moment in every manipulated relationship when you feel like you're constantly defending yourself. You're saying things like, "That's not what I meant," or "You're misunderstanding me," over and over again. And no matter how calmly or honestly you try to express yourself, it feels like you're talking to a wall. Or worse, a mirror that warps every word you say into something ugly. That's not miscommunication, that's manipulation. You're not being heard because they're not trying to understand you. They're trying to control the narrative. And the more energy you pour into being understood, the more power you give away. It often comes from a good place. You just want peace. You want to make things right. You want the other person to see your heart. But manipulators aren't listening for your heart. They're listening for your weakness. They're looking for the emotional strings they can pull to keep you hooked. And every time you break down and explain yourself again, you're handing them the manual on how to keep controlling you. So how do you break free from that? You stop playing the role they expect. You let go of the need to be understood by someone who's already decided not to understand you. You realize that your truth doesn't require their permission or their approval. You don't need to rehearse your decisions, justify your boundaries, or prove that your intentions are good. The right people will feel your energy without needing a monologue. The wrong people will never accept your truth, no matter how carefully you explain it. It's not about being cold or dismissive. It's about recognizing when a conversation isn't about connection, but control. You can still speak with grace, but you don't have to justify your emotional needs to someone who invalidates them. You can say no without a 3-paragraph explanation. You can say this doesn't work for me, and leave it at that. Silence in the face of manipulation is power. Distance is clarity. This is especially hard if you grew up in environments where love had to be earned through over-explaining, through proving your worth, through emotional labor. But that's not real love, that's survival conditioning, and it's time to unlearn it. You don't owe anyone access to your peace just because they demand it louder. You don't have to make someone else comfortable by abandoning yourself. And you certainly don't need to keep explaining yourself to someone who weaponizes your vulnerability against you. Start paying attention to how you feel after conversations. Do you leave them feeling clearer, more seen, more secure? Or do you walk away exhausted, confused, and full of self-doubt? That answer tells you everything. Manipulative people don't want clarity. They want chaos that keeps them in control. Don't feed it. Don't explain yourself into silence. Don't argue your way into being respected, because real respect doesn't need to be earned with exhaustion. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. One of the hardest but most liberating truths you'll ever embrace is this: sometimes the strongest move you can make is to let go. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with clarity and peace. When you're dealing with emotional manipulation, there comes a point where protecting your mental and emotional well-being means detaching, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. And in that detachment, you reclaim your power. Emotional manipulators want you close, but not in the way healthy people do. They want you close enough to influence, close enough to control, close enough to pull your strings whenever they feel their own slipping. So, when you begin to pull away, when you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop playing the game, they panic. That's because your distance signals something they can't tolerate, the loss of control. But detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying the weight of someone else's emotional chaos. It means you stop bleeding to keep a connection alive that was draining you to begin with. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that the relationship is toxic. You can wish someone well and still choose to protect your peace. And yes, you can walk away without needing to destroy them or prove anything to them. That is real strength. When you're entangled in a manipulative relationship, your emotions are constantly being used against you. Your empathy becomes a tool for guilt. Your compassion becomes a way to keep you in line. You stay not because it feels good, but because you're holding on to hope that things will change, that they'll finally understand, that the version of them you first met will return. But the truth is, hope can be a trap when it's rooted in illusion. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is accept someone for who they really are, not who you wish they would be. Detachment gives you perspective. It allows you to see the manipulation clearly, without the haze of emotional reactivity. You begin to recognize patterns, not just moments. You start to measure the relationship not by its highs, but by its consistency. And when you see that the pattern is built on control, not care, you understand that your healing lies not in fixing them, but in freeing yourself. Distance doesn't always mean physical separation, though sometimes that's necessary. It means emotional independence. It means not relying on them for validation, not craving their approval, not letting their moods dictate your self-worth. It means holding space for your own truth, even if no one else validates it. And it means making peace with being misunderstood by the very person who never really tried to understand you in the first place. It takes courage to walk away. It takes strength to let go of a connection you invested so much in. But you must remind yourself that your peace is not up for negotiation. You do not have to shrink, bend, or twist yourself into something unrecognizable to keep someone else comfortable. You are not put on this earth to be a container for someone else's unresolved pain. There's nothing selfish about choosing peace over chaos. There's nothing cruel about refusing to engage with manipulation. And there's nothing weak about stepping back in order to protect your spirit. In fact, it's the bravest thing you can do, because when you finally stop trying to manage someone else's dysfunction, you start managing your own healing. And in that moment, you stop surviving them, and you start saving yourself.